You ever wonder why Scrum teams use story points to estimate? Like, where did that come from, and why on earth would we do it? Well, understanding the why will impact some decisions you make about how. Number one, humans are terrible at estimating things, especially anything with any amount of complexity. And software definitely is complex. And when you ask someone how long something will take, they will give you a great guess, and it will be massively wrong. And we've shown this, we've proven this, and we know it anecdotally and scientifically. And because people are terrible at estimating things with complexity, story points were meant to help with that, particularly by allowing you to relatively estimate things. So rather than say, how long will this take? We say, is this about the same as this? Is it twice as much as this? Is it half of this? And being able to use those comparisons, we're quite good at. Humans are really great at saying, is this bigger or smaller than this? Not, is this 45 minutes longer than this? We're bad at that. Number two, to allow us to have estimates that bake in complexity and risk, the fact that we're working in a variable environment. If you've wondered why most teams tend to use the Fibonacci sequence when they're estimating rather than just having points 1 through 30, that is because the higher those points go, the bigger the gap between them. Because the more complex something is, the less we know about it. And we don't know if it's going to take us 3 days or 30 days. And we definitely don't know if it's going to take us 3 years or 30 years. And the bigger it gets, the bigger that gap and that risk is. So that allows us then to take that into account and to leave some more variability in those bigger items. That is what we're meant to do. So because of that, when we look at how teams should be, if they choose to use story points, it's not a mandatory practice, by the way, nor is estimation. If they see value in this, you need to maintain the base that makes them useful. Number one, you cannot compare them to actuals. We should not expect them to represent actuals. If we are holding people to account, if we said, you said this was a 4 normally takes 7 hours, this 4 took 12 hours. We've now missed the point of the fact that these points are supposed to help us get out of that obsession with accurate estimates, because we will be bad at them. And the moment you start getting in people's heads that a 4 is 7 hours is the moment you've undone the good of relative estimation. And now we're just back to estimating how long something will take rather than comparing it to another thing. So be careful of that. We also need to realize that estimates using story points are meant to be relative, which means they float. So over time, what you're comparing to will change, your skill level will change, the complexity of your system will change, how hard or easy it is to make that change will change. So we need to make sure we're not anchoring those story points on a number of hours, and instead anchoring them on comparative backlog items. So this backlog item is an 8, and then things like it should float along with it. Not this is 7 hours, because 7 hours will change and that will mean nothing, and we're back to that problem that humans are bad at hours. Let's also keep in mind that these points are supposed to keep inside them lots of variability. So if we try to tie hours to them, number one, you shouldn't because of what I just said, but if you did, you need to add a plus or minus percentage to that. So this could be anywhere from 4 to 30 hours, not this is 4 hours. That is not how estimates are meant to work. My great fear is that, number one, people blindly adopt practices. You assume story points is something you should do, and so you do it. Number two, we then assume that this is some backdoor way into accurately estimating software development. Let me tell you right now, it is impossible. Stop chasing it. Software development is research and development, and it has baked into it all of the complexities of that. It is infinitely hard to predict, and by the time you've done enough analysis to predict it, you've basically already written the code. And it's massively expensive to get accurate estimates. Story points were supposed to allow us to think the way that a real research company would think, and rather than try to estimate or budget within a penny, they start to think in how much am I willing to pay for this? And you start to think in comparative analysis rather than accurate analysis. So please, please, please do not do these things. Do not link story points to hours. That is not what they're for. That is not what they do. And if you do that, you have just created waste in your estimation. If you want hours and you're willing to take all of the risks and ugliness with that, just do hours. The moment you link story points to hours, you might as well do hours. Story points is just waste on top of that. Just estimate in hours then. Number 2, do not standardize story points outside the scope of a given product because they are meant to float with the complexity of that product. They're also meant to make sense to people when they're relatively estimating. I need a sample story from my backlog, from my application, from my organization to make sense when I compare things. So is this an 8 or a 16? Or I need to know what that means. The higher you standardize, the more generic it gets, and you're back to hours again. Number 3, do not chase accurate estimates. It is not a thing we should be chasing. We are wasting our time, our money, and our energy as companies. It is a gigantic waste of money to chase that. Instead, figure out how to live in a world of uncertainty. And that means releasing in smaller pieces. That means reprioritizing on a daily basis. That means figuring out how to learn as fast as possible and deploy as fast as possible rather than trying to predict these huge batches of work. And that involves steady state budgeting where you fund an initiative as a product rather than funding line items. So we are going to give this small business that is a product money because we believe in it and then allow it to operate rather than funding individual pieces of work. Because once you do that, now you're tying your funding to it. Now you have to tie estimates to it. And the reporting will start to drive weird behaviors. As number 4, do not tie reporting to story points. Stop doing it. As a product owner, ask me for dates. If you want dates, I will give you dates. And that is what I'm looking at my release schedule on, and I'm looking at estimates based on. Story points help me look into the future and say, what kind of capacity do we have? How many sprints away am I? The more sprints away I am, the bigger the uncertainty. But ask me for dates. That's fine. I will tell you, I think this is probably going to be ready by June. But the likely window, if you want 95% accuracy, is anywhere from May to August. And I can do that with a reasonable amount of certainty. Those are the kinds of questions you should be asking. Stop building org-wide story point reporting. The moment you start doing that, you're going to go down the path of standardizing, of equating them to hours, and of losing all of the original benefits they're supposed to give us, which is a healthier way of thinking about estimates in an uncertain world.